I'm gonna give that a try. There's a couple methods to use for this. One of them is stippling. So I'll just do a miniature stippling demo. Now with pen and ink, if you do want to like begin laying out major shapes with pencil and going back over it, I would recommend using something with a less graphite in it. So something like an HB pencil, if you are planning to draw that on top. So I'll show you what I would do if I were to do that, because there's a couple things that might help with this. So I'm going to switch this around because I have a tendency to so something that might be fun is to turn things upside down if you don't recognize it. So I'm going to try this chrome metallic using pen and ink, which I think this would be fun to do in graphite also, just because there's a nice gradation of tone between dark and light. But you can achieve like the equivalent of light to dark in this. So I will show you some things that I look for using this form. Kind of ballpark it. When I do this, I kind of imagine this subdivided up into a grid and looking for those relationships. So where does this line fall here? Where does it meet up along this edge? Around there. It's approximately there. So really all about looking for relationships. And when those relationships are off, that's when things don't look right. This is true with figures, this is true with landscapes, this is true with objects. It's all about finding the proportions. And so the sooner you try to do tasks that require you to judge that, the better. It takes a little practice. You don't want to get the finicky details in just yet if you're just laying things out. I think I'll show you like a version of crosshatching. Now crosshatching again is creating either a texture or illusion of value using, this is hatching, crosshatching, stippling, and of course you can change like how close together things are. It could be like right next to each other, or things can be very spaced out. And with like crosshatching, at least you can keep things straight, cardinal directions, but you can also play around and experiment with curved lines when you're dealing with forms. And this is probably that part of crosshatching that intimidates a lot of people and takes practice. It takes knowing perspective to make things look good. One tip that I have relating to perspective is oftentimes if you have something like a sphere and you're trying to add hatching, keep in mind the horizon line or your eye line. Where are you looking at it? And if things are above the horizon line, things tend to go up. Like the closer things are to here, the straighter they are. And then the further they go, it's just like those ellipses. So if this is a sphere that I'm trying to do with crosshatching, you know, if something's closer where I'm looking, it's closer to the middle. But if it's like an ellipse that I'm looking down on, like a soda can, this is usually, if I'm looking down on it, usually this, the lower something is, usually the more round it is. And then of course if it's eye level, it's like flat, just barely tapers. So that's probably closer to horizon. When cross-hatching, I usually try to have things follow, follow the, these aren't good. You know, if you imagine this covered in lots of ellipses, you kind of want your hatching marks to follow that. And then of course, if you want to make it darker or lighter, if you want to make it lighter, you can either space them out more. If you want to make it darker, you can bring them closer together. And then you can also begin to crosshatch. Now with something like this, you could follow the vertical, like so, and that kind of starts to create something there. Sorry, it's not the neatest example. So I'm probably going to take something like a method like this, and I'm going to apply this method to here, which has some, this has like a, this is like a conical like form on a old car bumper, vintage car, and that kind of comes out. So I'm going to attempt to get a similar range of values in here. When I look at this, I also almost imagine outlining each value section. So this is black, this is like mid-tone, lighter mid-tone, I try to break things down that way. So that might not have been clear. Although now that this is finished, basically, so what I was doing was, okay, here's like the lightest light shapes, and then it kind of goes out from there for each of these, lightest light. So I'm looking for each of these shifts in tone and the shapes they create. I have a variety of pens. When I was starting off, I used to just like say, okay, that's a completely solid black, I'll just fill this in completely. And that's not a wrong instinct, and I think you can do that. But sometimes I find that if I'm using a system like stippling or crosshatching, I want to kind of build up my marks in a similar way all throughout if I want to create a sense of unity. If this is just super solid and everything else is made up of stipples or like tiny marks, it often feels like it's in a different reality than what everything else is. So I'm going to show an example where everything is kept in a same reality. I have several pigment liners. I think 2 is the smallest one I have, going up larger. You can do it more freeform. You can do tight little hatches where it's kind of random. But you can also do more systematic things that like cover the entire image, almost like you're scanning it and then changing things if they are disrupted. All right, so I'm going to start very broad, and I'm going to try to find my lighter midtones. So I'm going to go maybe up and down, very light. I'm going to follow the directions of my forms for this example, but you don't have to. I'm going in and just kind of marking out the darkest darks, because in this, it's not a huge dark area. So what is obviously like black? And that'll help guide me, so if I do start making broad tones, I'll at least have some of these areas more defined. So I'm starting with one corner and working my way through. So I'm looking for the darkest value shape. I'm just going to do a quick outline. Or I don't want to outline it. Okay. Mostly because this is small. Now, this is a little more complicated. It's not all black. So I might just do little suggestions that is closest to the black color. So I'm breaking this up for now, and I'll come back to it later, but this is just to give me an idea of where these things are. Something else, if you're not sure, you can kind of, I call it ghost drawing, where you keep the tip of your pencil up a little bit and just kind of practice the motion first and then take it over. Especially with things where there's complicated angles. I do that with ellipses as well. You have a tendency when you're really focused, like I do, sometimes the more focused I get, I have a tendency to hunch my shoulders and crouch into my work. Maybe set a timer for every 15 to 20 minutes to look up, stretch your eyes, stretch your back, make sure you're not doing that. Ideally, if you have like something that, like drafting tables are good where they can tilt up a little bit so you don't have the tendency to like lean over this. Now with pens, you also want to be quick. You don't want to have your pen sitting or else it'll start to pool. For example, if I do this, it's pretty big versus if I'm just dotting. So if you're going slow with a line and then you just stop your line and don't pick up your pen really quickly, it'll have this mark that's pretty distinctive. I messed up a little bit there, but I think because I was doing a dotted line, I will be able to hide it. Messed up a little bit. But don't panic if you do mess up. Just keep working, and the more marks you make, the more one small mistake, depending on where it is, of course, kind of might be able to be camouflaged or hidden, or amongst other marks, it might not matter nearly as much. Almost have. Right now I'm mostly focusing on shapes, not the creation of texture or tone. But one thing about chrome being as reflective as it is It's very similar to water in that there's often like very subtle shapes, like right around this edge, there's like a little highlight next to something very dark. It reflects off of the surfaces around it. And depending on the form, it distorts what it's reflecting. Like if we have a straight solid mirror, it just reflects bouncing off, depending on what angle we're looking at the mirror. Most of this is laid out. Before I do lots of hatching, I might gently go around the edges that are very light, just to kind of remind me where those areas are. So when I look at this, I know it's rounded here, and I'd be tempted to follow the form, but then because it tapers, when in doubt, I would say try something out on the side if you want to figure out the logic behind something and see if it'll work. So I'm trying to figure out something like this look weird. Would it make sense to do something that all went the same direction? Maybe. So sometimes I suggest having like a scrap paper nearby to do tests like that. Kind of start filling in some of these midtones, trying to avoid touching the areas with where lighter tones are. Oh shoot, that was not what I wanted to do. Okay, well, I'll figure, you know what, if you do something wrong, can't erase it, so you'll just have to like keep going with your decisions. So I'm probably going to do something more like this, even though I wanted to do the other one. Of course, I wasn't being careful, so mine's a little sloppy, which is too bad because it took me so long to set this up. So take a deep breath in, don't try to rush it, and then don't beat yourself up if it's not what you expected. It's all trial and error to learn how to do this. Once I build up more marks, it might not even matter. It's really easy to kind of go overboard, but I also say when you're learning to do this, maybe it's better to go overboard and try to learn from what works and what doesn't. Some people are just too afraid to take risks. Like, you don't want to go about this mindlessly. Okay, yeah, so I messed up, but I'm just going to keep going. I'll go back over this the way I should have gone, the way I wanted to originally. Unfortunately, it didn't come out like, but hey, we do these experiments to try new things and make our own new discoveries. I think something with crosshatching that's fun is experimenting with edges, you know, to keep things going like that, or to have something match the edge, like here, or do you let it taper? It's easy to make things like that look too dark too fast. And since this is kind of going in a curve form, I'm going to follow that. Oh, there's like a light spot here. And with this plane, it's kind of lighter here, so I'll just kind of, I'm going to do something similar up here where I'm just going to follow the form, dot the light to remind myself that's there. It's very subtle. And right now this is kind of glaring white, so I'm going to go back and just kind of get that edge. And there's some vertical. And again, this is all in midtone, so I don't want to color all of this in. You can follow the form or you can go slightly against it, because it's hard to tell if it's changing angles. So maybe I'll even do one big, try not to hit the bright white part. Might regret that, but oh well. And then keep these closer together to Make that look a little darker, and then lighter again. And all of this in here is not bright white. Something I could, well, this is a little lighter. Something I can do all over this dark area with the grill, where it's kind of a gray, not white spaces between, is go over everything. And so when I go back later to build in the dark values, I'll have an all over tone. I just kind of started this direction arbitrarily, but and I'm not going to go all the way to the edge of this. I'm going to leave a little bit of a blank space. Of course, in the end, if this is too stark, because I really want that highlight to shine, like down here, I can go back in with some broken lines, and that kind of creates an illusion of tone as well. So I don't think I necessarily got the look of chrome. I'm still working, but so because I messed up here with the direction lines I wanted to do, I wanted to stick with something like this all the way up to the end. I ended up doing this kind of thing where I like to go in the cardinal direction, so I'm doing this method. From north to south, east to west, go east to west all over. Note that I'm not trying to scribble everything in. There's, you know, little areas for gaps. And that kind of allows a different kind of lighting than if it was just solid black. So stippling, cross-hatching can take patience and it requires focus. And it's easy to mess up, but I don't want that to deter you from trying this technique. It takes a long time to get good at it, but once you do get good at it, it can be used for all sorts of different styles. See what happens when you have big areas of tone and you kind of break it up a little bit. That might be a fun experiment. Hatching and like see what that does a little bit. It kind of lets that top area breathe a little more, which I didn't need to do because this is solid, but in the name of showing you different things you can try. Or what if you add dots between those? Now I'm going back in with a 45-degree northeast southwest. So yeah, this is less the texture and more of a drawing a reflective surface using hatching, cross-hatching. But the marks in themselves create their own texture that's distinct. Sometimes you have to go back and re-emphasize areas. Like I feel like I used to have some lines down here. So, you know, later on you can go back and adjust things to strengthen their appearance. This is also how I do like shadows in pen and ink, is that breaking up gradually. So like if I'm trying to create a shadow, you know, I start with like a solid shape, but then, I don't know, you can kind of break it off, like let it trail off. I like that. Okay, and lastly, to get the darkest dark, I'm gonna go back in northwest, southeast. So this is getting my solid black without it necessarily being solid. There's like little tiny gaps that appear, and it kind of makes everything feel more like as a whole unified. I'm going back into some of these areas where like looking, comparing from this side to this side, what's still too stark, and I'm just going in and adding some things to knock down some of the high contrast where I don't want high contrast to be. Adding in extra marks. Yeah, did not exactly end up looking like the chrome that I was going for, but hopefully still appears to have a smidge of volume. I'm going back in with another line. I think that flattened that out even more. Oops. Alright, well, don't know how successful that was. Clearly, even if this wasn't super successful, if one of you guys were to turn in something like this, it still definitely shows effort and care, and definitely trying to use this kind of method of building value and tone using pen and ink. So even if your experiments fail, don't be shy about posting them, as so long as you try and you really try your best to like match the tone and texture using these different methods. So good luck.